Be. You're listening to Ancient Faith Radio, timeless Christianity 24 hours a day.
This is Everyday Orthodox with your host, Elisa Bielatich Davis. We get together on Sunday nights to meet everyday Orthodox Christians. We're hoping to get to know the members of the body of Christ across all of our various jurisdictions and regions. We may worship in various languages or even on different calendars, but we have so much in common. Come get to know someone new and see how they're living out this Orthodox faith in another corner of the world. After all, every person is an icon of Christ, and as we'll see, every person has a story to tell. If you have a question for tonight's guest, we invite you to call in and join the conversation at 1-855-237-2346. That's 1-855-AF Radio. Now, here's Elisa.
It is Sunday, August 27th, 2023, and we are live on Ancient Faith Radio. I'm Elisa Bielatich Davis, and you're listening to Everyday Orthodox. We get together here every Sunday night to meet another Orthodox Christian and to build community through conversation. You know, we are divided up into so many different jurisdictions. We worship on different calendars in different languages. We have different bishops. So often we just don't know each other around the United States and Canada. And so I feel like real Orthodox unity is not so much about administrative unity. I feel like it's about grassroots unity. I think it just means that we're getting to know each other. We think of one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. And from that, everything else will flow. So we're here tonight to get to know actually two everyday Orthodox Christians, and I think you're going to enjoy them very much. They are both converts. They're both actually young people who are members of OCF. And I just didn't even plan this, but guess what? It is OCF Sunday. And so today is the Sunday of the year, the annual event where OCF students have been speaking in their parishes. We've been talking about OCF, raising money for OCF, because OCF is the Orthodox College Fellowship or Orthodox Christian Fellowship. Regardless, OCF is the college ministry. And so at various universities, we have groups of Orthodox kids who come together. We're going to talk a little bit about that. That'll come up tonight. And that's actually how I know Max and Malia. They go to the OCF at NYU in Manhattan. And so at any rate, I think you're going to enjoy them very much. I certainly do. You are welcome to join the conversation. The number is 1-855-AF Radio. That's 1-855-237-2346. You can call in. Matushka Trudy Richter is right here engineering the program, and she'll take your calls. And, you can find us on the Ancient Faith website. You can stream us live, or you could listen to us in the podcast archives. And you can also find us, of course, on the AFR app, Ancient Faith Facebook feed. And if you go to YouTube, to the Ancient Faith Ministries page, you can actually watch us. You can see everybody's faces in the conversation, which is also kind of fun. So join us on YouTube sometime. But all right, without any further ado, I'll stop talking and let's get to the program here tonight. So Max and Malia are actually good friends of my daughter, Vasi, and that's how I know them. And Malia grew up in Massachusetts. She went to school in Abu Dhabi, which is the capital of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. And after a very long spiritual journey, she was first introduced to Orthodoxy during her study away in New York by Max. And so she was baptized in the country of Georgia, which is where her God family's from. So she actually traveled back there and got to have this beautiful, authentic, lovely, but not that it's inauthentic to be baptized here, but it's extra special in an Orthodox nation, I think. But she currently works in cybersecurity, and she enjoys decorating her church with flower arranging. So she's active in their parish in a very beautiful, actually Carpatho-Russian parish in Manhattan. And Max grew up in Northern California, actually not too far from where I grew up. And he found Orthodoxy Interestingly, as a young man, as a teenager, he's interested in history. He studies world religions. He's just fascinated in all these things. And he just kind of stumbled across Orthodoxy and became an Orthodox Christian. And so now he's in New York still. He works as a paralegal. They've both finished college. He works as a paralegal and sings in the choir at church. So they're both very active there in their parish in the East Village. All right, so that is the introduction. Let's see, Max, let's start with you, because I feel like the story kind of begins with you. So tell me, first of all, where were you born? What were your early years like?
Right. So I was born in the town of Folsom, California.
Yeah.
I lived
for Johnny
Folsom
Cash
Prison
fans, Folsom Prison Blues, right there.
Yes. So I grew up in the vicinity of the prison. I was there my entire life. As a matter of fact, there's a story, an anecdote I'm very fond of telling that I can already see Malia shaking her head because she's heard it a million times. My mom was a preschool teacher, and she was a preschool teacher at a Lutheran preschool very close to Folsom Prison. And so some mornings she would go into work to teach kids, and she would go in and there would be two police officers outside. And this happened often enough that they knew her by name. So they would say, "Hi, Miss Catherine. So an inmate escaped today. So we're just going to be here, to watch out, make sure everything's all right."
No big deal.
Yeah.
Yikes. Now, other than that, I imagine Folsom Prison was like a big deal in like your imagination as a kid, but was it really a big part of life in Folsom? Or, I feel like Folsom's actually a pretty functional town outside of the prison, and you've got the big lake there, right? The reservoir. I used to go there as a kid sometimes with my uncles and on boats and stuff. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's funny. You never actually think about the prison being there normally. Of course, right? It's just in the background. What most of us end up thinking about is that's also where the primary or secondary headquarters for Intel is. So that's what we always end up thinking about is like, oh, whose dad works for Intel, something along those lines. But then otherwise, what we all end up thinking about and learning about in school is that's also where the gold rush in California started.
That's right.
So,
gold country.
Yeah, that comes up a lot.
Yeah, that's a big deal, actually, all around Sacramento and up in the mountains and all over. Was Folsom was big with the gold as well, or is it just regionally, just part of the bigger region? Yeah.
I think it was a thing in the bigger region. But of course, as I'm from just outside of Folsom, technically, I spent most of my life in El Dorado Hills, but we did move around a little bit as a kid. So, the whole 916 area code I'm representing here. But
but it's true. The
from
Gold
Elk Grove to El
Rush,
Dorado
it's a big deal
Hills.
there. It's a big deal there. I used to take my kids to camp in Jackson, California, and they've grown up in Texas. And they were like, "Why is everybody always talking about the gold rush?" I'm just like, it's like San Antonio. They talk about the Alamo all the time. Like, this is a big deal. This shaped California. That's neat. That's really cool. So as a kid, were you already interested in that kind of history? Like, were you kind of fascinated by, like, maybe questions of the gold rush and the migration out to California and all that? Or did it take a while before you started picking up on that stuff?
It's the funniest thing is, despite being in an area where people talked about history a lot, I was never that interested in American history or in things like that. But I was always very interested in questions of like culture and religion. And I think, funnily enough, where that started was probably fantasy books. From a very young age, I was a really big fan of Tolkien and things like that. And so I was always a fan of sort of these worlds of like history. I don't know if you remember maybe the Percy Jackson books or if your kids read those.
Who's fascinated with Percy Jackson. How could I forget? We're going to go see the author for like the 8th time as his new book comes out next month. This is a big deal.
Yes.
It's a very big
Percy
deal. Yeah.
Or maybe Percy Jackson books, like the 39 Clues books. My sisters had the American Girl doll books. I didn't read those, but that was very like, I read a lot as a kid. And so I think that's where my interest in history and in cultures like really, really started. So from a very, very young age, these were things that just I've thought about a lot, really fascinated me. And I think this is a common thread with a lot of people who become Orthodox, is that they're very into the history of the church, that they think about the past, that they think about where things come from, and they think about sort of the origins of things. And when you draw that thread to the past, I think that's where, at least for me, the faith really comes alive.
Oh, that's neat. I think you're right, though. I think I wouldn't say everyone who converts. Like for me, I really came in backwards, I would say, but I think that there are a huge number, a huge percentage of our Orthodox converts are people who came in exactly like you're describing, right? Especially Tolkien and just that idea of all these different worlds and this legacy and the history and the poetry of it. And then as you start looking into Christianity, you start seeing all of that peeking up about Orthodoxy.
I think there's a Tolkien and C.S. Lewis to Orthodoxy pipeline that we're not talking about as a society. though I can say not everyone does that, right? If we look at, of course, she's going to talk later, but Malia, I think, came in the other direction where it was the other way around for her.
Yeah. Yeah, and me too. And I think a lot of people also, it's fascinating to me how many different paths there are, but you're right, yours is not an uncommon one for sure. So what were you like as a little kid? Like, but I guess there's sort of maybe before Tolkien and after Tolkien, maybe for you. I don't know, but what were you like when you were little?
Oh, I was an obnoxious little know-it-all. I mean, that's all I can really say. You can ask my mom.
He's grown out of it.
No, I haven't. No. I've only gotten worse. That's the shame of it. But I was an obnoxious little know-it-all as a kid. I read a lot and I had a lot to say. And I still have a lot to say, unfortunately. But thankfully, I'm working on the humility. Maybe that'll grow into me. But I am on a constant journey with Christ to be a little bit more humble and to maybe interrupt people a little less.
Me too, Max. That is the story of my life right there. But okay, so as a kid, were you, when would you say you started really being an avid reader? And what else were you into? And paint us a picture. What were you like?
Yeah, so from a young age, maybe the age of 7 or 8, I started being a really avid reader. And I think that led me on a lot of journeys throughout life and really shaped my personality. That I was reading sort of these historical or these fantasy books. And I think that always led me to think about things in this very, this way of wondering, what are the things we see? What is the world we see, right? And maybe I was a little bit of a precocious kid. I was sort of trying to read at a higher level, trying to ask lots of questions, ask questions that maybe got on people's nerves. But I always had, another question to ask or another point to make towards people. And I think that continued well into me being a teenager, which is what led to me inquiring a lot about things like sort of history and religion and where I am and what other places are like, and wondering really a lot about the world and what other people are doing outside of my little bubble.
Oh, that's neat. So as you're doing this, let's say as you get into those high school years, how is it that Orthodoxy even came to your attention? Because truly, and I can name, probably 5 churches in the area there, but nobody knows about it. Nobody stumbles across this. Where'd you find it? And I guess also part of the question is if what you were finding is historical, how did you realize that it still existed? Because plenty of people can get real interested in Constantinople, right? But they have, in school, they kind of say that, then it died out and that was that.
Yeah.
It didn't, of course.
There's a very interesting line here that has a lot of curves, to be honest with you. But I become really interested in, maybe as a teenager, maybe around 15, 16, I get really interested in the idea of truth and what truth is. And I start really questioning. I never felt very fulfilled with the faith I grew up with. I grew up as an evangelical Protestant, and I just didn't find it very fulfilling or there was that much depth to it. And so I always had a lot of questions that I just felt like were unanswered. And it led to me looking into a lot of other faiths and reading up and really studying and looking up books on things like, on Buddhism or on, traditional religious practices in other parts of the world or, things like that. And it led me, along with sort of knowing a lot about history, to finding out about a couple of things. But what I think... So there were a couple of things that really interested me in particular about the Orthodox faith. But what's sort of strange is the first thing that really piqued my interest, the first thing where I really said this really is something different, was learning about hesychasm and the practice of hesychasm, which is something that's, of course, really unique to the Orthodox faith. And when I learned what hesychasm was, I was like, oh, there's something different here. And I thought, I kind of need to look more into this. I don't really know anything about the Orthodox Church other than, I vaguely knew like what the Russian Orthodox Church was, maybe. But when I learned like that there's such an idea as hesychasm or such an idea as theosis, I thought this is something different, and this is something really interesting. I should check out some books on this. I should see what other people have to say. Funnily enough, I listened to a few podcasts from Ancient Faith Radio. Shout out to Father Andrew Stephen Damick. Big fan of him.
I was going to say, with the Tolkien connection, I had a feeling Father Andrew might appeal to you. Yeah, he's awesome. He's fantastic. But okay, so well, that's neat though. And that makes sense really, right? Because those are those deeper traditions that they go deep, right? And they're very beautiful, and they're so foreign to conversation in especially evangelical Protestant circles, right? You never hear about that. So that got you, huh? So what did you do? Like, at what point does this transfer from you reading books and listening to podcasts, and then all of a sudden you like being in a real life parish, talking to a priest? Like, how does it transition?
So the first time that I ever visit an Orthodox parish, and I've read about it, and I'm very interested in it, and I'm very interested in a lot of religions. I actually visit a lot of different churches and different religious institutions as a teenager. But in, I want to say, November of 2016, I visit St. Anna's, Roseville, California. Wonderful, wonderful parish, by the way. Father Christopher Flassoris, I believe, is the priest there still. Wonderful, wonderful man. So I get the chance to visit St. Anna's, and I recall I got my mom to drive me, actually. I got my mom to drive me there and visit, and she does not enjoy the service for some reason. I don't know why. She didn't particularly enjoy it. She didn't find it quite to her liking, and decided that we'd head out right when communion got served. But I really thought there was something there. I thought, wow, this is something totally different from what I've experienced. This is something really interesting. When can I go again? And so from there on, I'm trying to find, like, it's a long drive, so I've got to find someone to drive me until I eventually do get my driver's license and start just driving myself every Sunday and going very regularly to St. Anna's out in Roseville, California.
Oh, that's neat. That's really neat. So what did your parents think about this? I mean, speaking of your mom, right? Like, not just what did they think of this particular service, but they've got this son who is, examining Buddhism and looking at world religions. And did that make them nervous? Were they like nervous about orthodoxy, or was it like, well, at least he's not Buddhist? I mean, it could have gone further.
I think they were just thoroughly confused. I think they were really, truly confused. They had never heard of it, and I think for them one of the biggest sticking points was that on the church it says a Greek Orthodox Church, and so they thought, yes, he's just fascinated with Greece, I guess. I don't know what's going on here, but I think he's just decided to become Greek.
Oh, that's interesting, right? It's kind of a flip side of the problem of maybe a church that is too ethnic or is not welcoming to an American, right? That wasn't the problem, but they're just thinking like it's the Greekness that is so interesting. It's the foreignness of it, maybe. Or
I think that was a big part of it for them, was that sort of confused them, that idea of it being foreign. And I tried to explain to them, no, it's not foreign at all. It's sort of, it's not even particularly Greek.
Right.
A Greek language comes up a little bit, but the parish isn't particularly Greek ethnically. And so I'm trying to sort of explain this to them. And I think, at least for them, it just wasn't quite clicking. They were just very confused. They weren't entirely against it, because, of course, I was still very much Christian and going to church and observing a faith. So I don't think they were reviling it by any means. But I think they were just confused through and through.
So what ends up happening? Were you, like, at what point did you convert? Was it at St. Anna's that you officially became Orthodox?
Yes, so at St. Anna's in, I want to say, summer of 2018, I recall that it was the feast of St. Mary Magdalene, the women martyrs. I recall the feast, but I don't remember what the exact date was that year. But I want to say that was about July 2018 that I converted and was chrismated officially into the church.
Oh, beautiful. That's neat. Did your parents come? Or did you?
They did. Yeah.
That's
Both
good.
my parents came and were there for the service.
That's neat. That's very neat. All right. So then, so you're finishing up high school. Like, what did you imagine yourself doing with the rest of your life? Who did you think you wanted to be back in high school?
Well, this is its own story because I received the congressional nomination to attend West Point in my senior year of high school.
Oh, no way. Was that the
And then
plan? Did you want
that
to go to
was
the military?
that was the plan. My plan was to be a military
I
officer.
could see you loving West Point, actually. I see that. And yet NYU, not exactly
Yes.
the same. What
It was
happened?
it was a very funky journey on multiple levels, and there was a lot of levels of strangeness to it. But I'm a very driven person, I guess. I have very strong ideas about what I plan to do. So I got the congressional nomination at West Point in January 2019, but unfortunately in March 2019 I was medically disqualified for taking ADD medication.
Wait, so no one at West Point is taking ADD medication?
No, they are. This is actually where it gets really funny. This is where it gets really funny. See, here's the thing. You can't get in if you're taking, say, an ADHD medication, but once you're in, they can prescribe it to you.
Okay. All right.
This is one of the
Bureaucracy
cruel
stuff,
ironies.
isn't it? Don't you
This is
just
one of the
love
cruel ironies of
bureaucracy?
life.
Yeah, there you go. All right, then.
That's one of the cruel ironies of life. But
Okay.
that's
So
a
in
bit
other
of a-
words, you have to know that in advance and say,
You do.
of course I'm not. Why would I be taking that? Don't be
You
silly.
do have to know. You have to
Yeah.
know in advance, and I didn't find that out until it was basically too late, which I suppose was foolish on my part to think that someone would tell me.
Well,
things
or
like
maybe it's
this.
providential, right? God protected you from that information because he had something else in mind.
Yeah. And then what I end up doing is going to UC Santa Cruz. I go to UC Santa Cruz for all of 1 year, where I played rugby and continued attending church. I attended Prophet Elias in Santa Cruz. Yet another shout out to a wonderful parish.
Excellent parish. Wait, so can I just say West Point and UC Santa Cruz may be the two most diametrically opposed schools in the United States? Like, really, if I was trying to find the opposite of West Point.
And
That's where I'd go.
that wasn't even the plan, but I ended up a banana slug.
There you go.
We all
There
get
you go.
slugged
That's hilarious.
sometime, and I
Yep,
chose to
yep.
do it the banana path. But ultimately, despite my banana inclinations, after keep in mind, my freshman year was when the COVID-19 pandemic started, March of 2020, and we were all sent home. UC Santa Cruz, interestingly, was one of the first universities in the country to send students home for the COVID pandemic because they were dealing with a grad student strike and wanted to pretend it wasn't happening.
Easy peasy. Send you home. One professor can talk to everybody on Zoom. No problem. We don't need grad
Yeah, exactly.
students.
It makes us
works.
pretend everything's easier. And I said, this administration is perhaps imperfect. And so I've decided I was going to transfer to New York University because I was a double major in history and philosophy, had better programs for that. Thought I wanted to attend law school, has a very good law school. I thought, well, I can maybe get into that mindset, right? So I transferred to NYU and got in, which is actually even stranger as a story. Just to throw in another really small divergence, I didn't get into NYU applying as a freshman, did get in as a transfer, despite the fact that the acceptance rate is actually lower for transfers than for first-year applicants.
No kidding, because most schools, it's the opposite, right? Most schools, it's easier to get in second year. There you go.
NYU is a very weird school. They don't accept a lot of transfers. They usually accept less than 100 a year. I think it's just because my freshman year grades were pretty good. But
that is a big deal, right? Because then it's like, well, we didn't think you'd be great in college, but it turns out you're doing fine. So come on over.
Yeah, I think that's what that was.
Cool.
But beyond that, I applied and got in and decided like an idiot to actually move out to New York. And I've been
while COVID was still going.
I did. I went to New York the summer of COVID, and I have been trapped. I've been trapped in New York City ever since then. They don't let me leave.
New York is wonderful, but it was a trap in 2020, right? I mean, were you just pretty locked down? Because from what I recall, NYU students were like in the dorms, don't come out. We'll bring you food. They tried 3 times a day, didn't always succeed. Like, it sounded bad. It sounded bad, Max.
It was bad. It was very bad. I mean, you threw out New York is wonderful there. I call that into question, but I'm here for better or for worse. And I will say that I wasn't in the dorms. I was living off campus. Transfer students don't get guaranteed housing. It's very expensive to get as a transfer student. It was more in my price point to live off campus. And so I did. I was just doing my thing, I guess, hanging around New York City while everything was closed. It was a pretty strange time, but I'm a pretty strange guy, so I made do.
Well, and you were from Folsom, right? So, like, you weren't used to having all the museums and the shows and the restaurants anyway. It was just like Folsom when it was all.
But I was used to feeling like I was in a prison. Is that what you're saying?
Maybe. That is possible. That is exactly what I was saying. Absolutely. Oh, that's funny. So what'd you major in New York?
I am a history philosophy double major. I have that on my diploma.
Very nice. Very, very nice. All right. Well, okay. So this is Max's story through college. And then now we're going to pause because I now want to hear Malia's story. We just have a minute to start, Malia, and then we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and we're going to go through your whole story. But tell me, where does your story start? Like, where were you born?
So ironically, it starts in New York because my family, I was born in New Rochelle, which is right at New York. So we lived in Mount Vernon, which is next to the Bronx. And my dad and I were there for, I think, until 2003, we left right before I turned 4, because education, especially there, was not very good. And my dad was pretty far away from family. So in 2004, we moved to Massachusetts, Western Massachusetts, to be closer to my aunt and uncle. And yeah, that might be a minute. I'm not sure. So, and now I'm back in New York.
Right? I mean, you keep kind of ping-ponging back to New York, but so tell me, how was it in Massachusetts? Did you like growing up there? Were you a pretty happy kid there?
I really liked it. I think one of the most important parts, and like Max and I have talked about this, about like having children and all that, is that I was like outside all the time and was in the trees. I like could come home. I mean, when I was a little bit older, I'd come home. I'm not only child, so I'd come home and I just like, I was also a latchkey kid, so I'd just come home and I'd be able to go outside with my friends and like hang out. I was really into like survival skills as a kid too, so like I got to learn stuff like that, got to learn how to track, and like I was never really good at it, but like I got to be like a kid outside, which I think would have been really, really, really hard to be obviously in New York, in an apartment. So yeah,
that's for sure. I mean, I know a lot of people grow up in the city and it feels very normal and good to them. It's fine. Mm-hmm. But it is, when you come from the suburbs or from the countryside, it is just hard to picture, isn't it? Like, it's hard to imagine what that's like, especially if you're someone who got to rove on her own for a while.
Yeah, I very distinctly remember being in high school, and I went to like a pretty fancy boarding school, and I was a day student, but like, people were boarders there. And one of my friends was from New York, and we were out, like, we were by the river, we were going out, like, we took our shoes off, we're out in the like woods or whatever. And one of my friends like scales a tree, and like a small one, not like a big branch tree, like, just climbs it up, like, kind of like a monkey, I guess. And then jumps down, and my friend, he looks from New York, he looks at him and he's like, how'd you do that? Do that again. And we kind of all like, he was like with like our day student friends, we all kind of looked at him, we're like, what do you mean you've never climbed a tree? He's like, you can climb trees? We're like, what?
Right? They get mad at you in the parks if you climb trees, right? Yeah. People would see you and get in trouble. So I mean, there's a freedom to that, to being out in the woods, mm-hmm. and Massachusetts is beautiful. So that makes sense. All right, we are going to take a very short break, and I want to hear more about Malia and her growing up and her whole journey, because like Max also, she had kind of a long, complicated faith journey on her way to the church. So we will be right back, and I want to remind you, you're welcome to call in if you like. The number is 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346, and we will be right back after this break.
Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis will be back in a moment. give Elisa and her guest a call at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO.
This is Andrew Williams. Since the advent of the internet, it has become increasingly obvious that our society suffers from a pornography problem, and Orthodox Christians are no exception. While many practical resources are available to help those who struggle with pornography use, these fail to address the problem at its deeper spiritual root, and to acknowledge how it affects our whole society. My new book, From Object to Icon, The Struggle for Spiritual Vision in a Pornographic World, shows how all of us can change the way we see, how we can learn to see iconographically rather than pornographically. Whether or not we struggle with pornography use, this book shows us how to stop objectifying others and instead see the spiritual reality in everyone we encounter. From Object to Icon is now available at store.ancientfaith.com. That's store.ancientfaith.com.
We're back with Everyday Orthodox with Elisa Bielatich Davis. Do you have a question for Elisa and today's guest? Call in now at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Here again is Elisa.
And welcome back to Everyday Orthodox. We're here tonight with Max and Malia. And we were just talking with Max about how as a kid he was precocious and fascinated by fantasy literature and history and kind of found his way to the Orthodox Church through books and through questions about truth. And now we're talking to Malia, who, true to promise, did not come into Orthodoxy that way at all. She came in a totally different way. And we were just talking about how as a kid you just liked, exploring and survival skills, and you were going to, know how to, I don't know, what were you going to do? Learn how to make a fire in the woods? And did you have that book, like the worst case scenario survival guide? Did you have any of those?
I had so many.
Yeah.
I had a lot of zombie ones too. At 12 or whatever, I made my dad stop watching The Walking Dead because he's like, you have better ideas on how to kill zombies than The Walking Dead does. Because that was the age, I guess. I'm not sure why I was so interested in that. But yeah, it's a real world application of my skills.
Right. I mean, you should have been writing letters into the writers and been like, listen, here's what your people need to do. All right.
I wasn't allowed to watch it though. So I'm not actually sure what they were doing.
Your dad was just like, trust me, Malia, they've got nothing on
Trust
you.
me,
Not
you're
a
smarter
bit.
than that.
Yeah. So, okay. So as you're getting older then, actually, what was the faith in your house? Like, were you guys very religious? What were you doing?
No, I mean, like, technically, I wasn't baptized. My dad was baptized as an older adult. I'm not sure if he was like a teenager or an adult because he was baptized in the Methodist church. My grandmother was Methodist. She died when my dad was pretty young, and he was baptized to kind of like as an attachment to her in her church. So I know that, but I didn't really ever go to church as a kid. It wasn't really. I mean, we were culturally Christian, we celebrate Christmas and all that sort of stuff. And I would say that my family believed in God, but we weren't really religious.
Yeah. I think that's really common, actually, and me too.
Mm-hmm.
So there you go. But
and yeah, I mean, I lived in Massachusetts. I think it was actually really a blessing that I wasn't raised religious in Massachusetts, in the part of Massachusetts that I grew up in. I think that's where the Unitarian Church is really strong, and I think that would have been much more damaging than coming to it as an adult, where I could see what was the truth.
Yeah. Absolutely. I do think there is some truth to that, right? That if you have too many sort of ideas ingrained into you, I think it would be harder to convert and to go through and clear those out. And when instead you're just kind of discovering things that you haven't thought about before, it's maybe an easier path for sure. So as a little kid, running around, what did you think you were going to do or be, or where did you see your life going?
I think I wanted to be a lot of things. I really liked the survival things, but I also I was a smart kid. I read a lot. I definitely wanted to be a good kid for I guess. And as I got a little bit older, I got really interested in counterterrorism. That was why I went to one of the reasons why I went to the UAE. I started learning Arabic at like 14.
How does one
And
learn
that
Arabic
was
at 14? Like on Duolingo?
so
Or
my
did you-
no, so my dad worked at this prep school that I talked about, and he, I guess, kind of right like during like when ISIS got involved or something, he was like, you know what, like, because that was when I started learning. I started learning at like 2014, 2015. He was like, you know what, Malia, you should start taking lessons with the Arabic teacher at school. I think would be good for you. And I really liked it. I think Arabic is a beautiful language, and I stuck with it for many years. I mean, technically I didn't minor in it, but I took more classes than the minor at my school's program. And I lived in the United Arab Emirates, and yeah, so like that was a big drive of mine. I really thought that I was going to go into counterterrorism. That's still an interest of mine. I'm kind of in the more domestic side of national defense. I'm in cybersecurity right now, but yeah.
Wow, I didn't realize that you had studied Arabic and that this is really what called you in, was this kind of fascination.
Mm-hmm.
But also it sounds like you have a real appreciation for the culture as well. I think,
Mm-hmm.
obviously you're not just looking at terrorists, you're looking at a whole beautiful culture. And this happens to be a skill set that works for that. So I guess that kind of answers the question of how you ended up at NYU Abu Dhabi, because I remember just when Vasi, my daughter, was first starting out at NYU about the same time as you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Is Abu Dhabi like the biggest campus, or it's one of the bigger? There's Abu Dhabi and Shanghai and New York. Is that right?
Yeah, so there are 3 NYU degree granting programs. NYU Abu Dhabi is one of them. I would actually say like NYU Abu Dhabi itself is the smallest campus. Shanghai is bigger because it's partnered with a Chinese school. We're by ourselves. So I think my graduating class was like 300-ish, which, isn't like, so there's like 1,200 people. They're growing.
Right. Yeah.
I was there, I think my junior year was the school's 10-year anniversary. So
So it's fairly new.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I've never heard of it. It wasn't like a long.
Yeah.
Well, and
there's like a whole,
Like for comparison, NYU New York does graduation at Yankee Stadium. Right. So
yes.
so they feel like Yankee Stadium versus 300 graduates. It's a little bit different.
Yes.
There's a difference there.
Yeah, so that was one of the reasons, and I really loved school in Abu Dhabi. I loved Arabic, and I continue to like Arabic. And yeah, NYU's kind of, their tagline for NYU Abu Dhabi was like their global arts like honors college, and I guess that worked with what I was going for. So yeah.
There you go. How did your dad feel about you heading off to the Middle East?
I think he was prepared. I think it was actually, it was a really easy decision. It was the most financially logical choice for me. And I think my dad was really happy because I was kind of fronted with my 2 main choices were not to get into finances, but my 2 main choices were Columbia, which was going to put me 120 grand in debt, and NYU Abu Dhabi, which was free. And so when my dad heard free, he was like, "You're going."
To be fair, that's not free for everyone. It's not like a free program. It's that you got a full ride. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I got a full ride.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
They paid me to go there. So
wow.
I got $3,000 a year to go there. So they didn't pay me a lot to go there, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people pay to go there. Yeah. So that's fantastic. That's awesome. So
exactly.
Out of curiosity, the United Arab Emirates, is it a fairly sort of secular government in the sense that were you able to just walk around looking like you look in New York, or did you have to be a little more covered, a little more careful? What's it like in the UAE?
So definitely don't dress like how some people in New York dress. Definitely you should be covered. It is increasingly more tolerant towards shorts and kind of cleavage and that kind of thing, but when I first got there, we were definitely told, and you would be continued to be told, don't wear shorts off campus and dress appropriately, which is hard when it barely goes below 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the country. So it's hot there. It has liberalized a lot since I started in 2018. After COVID especially, it's increasingly gotten more liberal. For example, like Muslims can drink legally now in the country. That's a really, really big like change. But definitely, I mean, both out of respect for the culture, respect for the culture, and just kind of the idea that people will stare at you if you dress revealing, isn't very comfortable. So it was also kind of, I mean, quite honestly, people would stare at me no matter what, because I'm white and blonde and like, you know, I was very noticeable. But no matter what, you don't exactly feel comfortable when everyone's looking at you if you're wearing like shorts or something like that. So it was very much dress more modestly. Religion was really interesting I don't know if that's answered your question, but I can jump to the religion part as well. I mean, definitely outward displays of Christianity and Judaism were very much not allowed in the beginning. They're not technically allowed. And my understanding is you're not allowed to like really convert people, or like, especially not Muslims. You're allowed to like baptize babies, but conversion is really kind of frowned upon. And yeah, I mean, like however, that being said, the UAE did welcome the Pope in 2019. So there's a lot of tolerance from the UAE government. It just was still, Islam is the first and foremost part of the nation, which that makes sense. That is their country. And so the reason why the Pope came is there are probably millions of Filipino migrant workers in the UAE. And so the Pope came and was like, I think that was the main reason why. And I remember, I unfortunately didn't get to go, but I know a lot of people, like there was a lottery for like tickets to go. And so like I know like a lot of students got to go.
That's really neat. That's really neat. All right. Okay, so you're over there. You are studying, what technically was your major? I mean, you spoke Arabic. Science. It's not really Arabic, right? It was political science?
Political science, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
And then I tried to do a minor in Arabic. I didn't technically get all the credits to do a minor, but I took a lot of Arabic classes.
Well, I always tell my kids, like, minors, like, you know, just get a degree. Don't worry about it.
But, political science.
Political science degree is a very good degree. I wouldn't worry about that too much.
Yeah.
But so what made you decide to do a semester in New York if everything was going so well over there?
Yeah, so the program was designed, like the school very much wanted students to get a global education. That was very much, so like NYU has a global network. It has campuses all over the world. And so honestly, I went to London during the semester during COVID, and London was just because honestly that's where political science classes were. And I was like, yeah, cool, like let's go. I kind of like, it was my sophomore year. I was like, I kind of miss speaking, like, you know, like being in a country that's like, you know, kind of more closer to what I'm used to. I'll go to London. And then what day was it? March 15th, Trump closed the border to Europe. And I got an email from my school that said, hey, we don't know if you're going to be allowed back anytime soon. Can you make a flight tomorrow on Friday? And I wake up like, you know, Thursday morning, like, what? No. And so I emailed it back. I'm like, what do you mean tomorrow? Like, I have an entire apartment to pack up. And I was like, can I fly out like Monday? And they're like, no. Like, I forget if it was Saturday night. I think it was Saturday night. Yeah. They're like, okay, how about Saturday night at 5 p.m.? I was like, okay, I guess so. And it hadn't really clicked for a lot of people what COVID was yet, obviously. And I kind of I remember getting a coffee the day before I was supposed to leave in like this little coffee shop, and there were like these two older people sitting next to me, because like, you know, it's like I was like, you know, like an early Saturday morning or whatever, and they're talking about COVID, and they're talking about it in like the way that I'm like, this feels like a foreshadowing event. They're like, oh, I hear these things are closing, XYZ, like calling them all that. I'm like, wow, like, is this actually serious? And I had fun though. I was like telling people, I'm getting kicked out of your country. I was getting free drinks. Like, it was kind of fun. I kind of thought it was still funny. And then I get to the plane and everybody is trying to leave. Like everyone, like every expatriate is leaving Europe and the United Kingdom. So like people have their giant dogs on the plane. People, like, there are long lists to get on, like, you know, like stand by. And I board the plane and we fly, and then in the air, and I'm feeling also, just to comment on this, I was incredibly sick on the plane. I did not feel good either.
Oh, no.
By the time I was in the air, I was like coughing and not feeling well. And
I'm sure the people around you loved that, right?
Oh, yeah, right?
Pre-mask, right? Like, this is just happened.
It just happened. And I had known people who, like, I know people were flying back to Abu Dhabi and because Abu Dhabi was testing at the border, and we're getting tested and we're going into quarantine. I didn't know them. Like, I hadn't hung out with them. I later found out that one of my friends was the 100th case in Mexico. NYU students had COVID, but kind of just had to leave. So we were leaving, and no one really thought about it yet because they didn't know how contagious it was. And then on the plane, I'm starting to feel sick, and the pilot comes in and he's like, "Hey guys, by the way, just to let you know, the CDC is going to board our plane when we land," and at JFK. And everybody freaks out, obviously, because it's the CDC, and we're like, wow, we're in an apocalypse movie, cool. And then we land, and then the pilot comes back on, and he's like, the CDC's not coming, don't worry. And we all cheer. We're like, okay, thank God. And then I spent 6 hours in customs. And I had to go to like the special line because I'd been in Berlin the weekend prior, because I was like doing my European study away, and everybody who'd been in like mainland Europe had to go through a COVID check, which was very minimal. They took your temperature. The cutoff was 101. I was 100 degrees. I don't know what they would have done if I was 101. I think they still would have let me leave. I don't think they had a plan for if people actually had fevers. And they took your seat number and they checked your ID, and then you left. It took 6 hours. My dad, waiting in the car, gets the email like, hey, you're remote now. He never ends up going back to that office because he quit during COVID. And we go home, and I'm sick for 2 weeks because I definitely had COVID. So yeah, London. And then long story short, because my semester away was ruined by COVID, I got a second one. And because I got a second one during my senior year, the only really logical choice for me was NYU New York, because I needed high-level classes. And that worked out. And during that, I met Maxwell, and I can tell how Max and I met as well.
Tell me. Yes, I always love that.
Yeah. So it is thanks to some very kind people at Stanford University who decided to do a data science program on like, they wanted to statistically match people that who should marry each other at universities. And I had taken this survey, and I got the results February 14th, 2021, and Max emailed me and said, hi, my name is Maxwell. You should add me on Snapchat. And I was like, okay, cool. And we talked a little bit. I never saw his face until, and I didn't see his face until our first date. So it was a blind date for me, but not for him, because I have like my pictures on Instagram and stuff. Summer of 2021, I was traveling in Yosemite with my father, and Max reached out and was like, oh, you should go do the John Muir Trail. I was like, oh, that's cool. Are you still in New York? And he's like, yeah, I am. And then we connected the day before classes started, and we met. And yeah, we've been dating ever since. But yeah.
I love that you two met through this like matching program, right? Because and I think was it all a bunch of NYU kids? Was it all across the country? Because I feel
it was just NYU.
I feel like you guys are like the only ones who actually really ended up working out. Like, do you meet a lot of other couples who are like, yeah, we got matched on that funny survey thing?
No, and we did a news like they wrote an article about us, and we're doing another article in September with them, because they reached out to us, and I think we might be the only successful match from NYU. I'm not sure.
That's adorable, though. I
love
that.
It worked.
So as you're getting to know Max, and you guys are getting along so well, at what point did he tell you he was Orthodox, and what did you think of that?
I thought it was, I wanted to go to an Orthodox church with him, and so I kind of, during my COVID store, and my NYU Abu Dhabi store, I kind of skated over the whole religious aspect of what was happening in my life as well. So 2019, I think, Like my freshman year of college, I'm friends with some people on my jiu-jitsu team, and they start talking. I'm like, you should come to mass with us. And so I started going to like a Catholic mass at my school, which was very interesting because we had a priest there who I'm not exactly sure how it worked, but he was now just like a professor, but he was also a priest, but he was Catholic. So I don't really know how everything was worked there, but like he did mass every Sunday there. But it was in a classroom. It was in my international relations classroom. So linoleum floors, you move the tables away. They had like a white tablecloth, and that was pretty much like and a PowerPoint of like the Psalms and everything. And I went, and the first time I went, I was like, this feels different. This feels important. And I kept on going. And then I was going in London, and I was thinking really seriously about converting, and then COVID happened. And I was like, okay, I can't convert. And then COVID continued to happen, and I was talking to the church, like the Catholic community in my hometown, and they kind of were like, you don't really live anywhere, COVID's happening, we can't really help. And I was like, okay, cool. And then COVID continued to happen, and I went back to NYU Abu Dhabi, and churches in general were just completely shut down in the UAE. I went like a couple times, like they only really started opening in like 2022, like winter 2022. Like it took a while, and Muslims like could worship and all that, but like very much it was shut down. Like Christians services were really shut down. And that was hard, obviously. And I still definitely was like, wanted to be a Christian, and I wanted to get baptized. And I kind of felt like there was like a barrier. Like I felt like something, like I was confused about why it was so hard. Then I went to NYU, and kind of I got the same story from the NYU Catholic Center of like, oh, it's great that you want to be Christian, but you're not going to be here for a year. So like you can just come back, or you can figure it out in Abu Dhabi. And I'm like, okay,
like they have
no
like
one
a year-long catechumenate, so you can't do the program, you can't take the class.
And no one in Abu Dhabi wanted to take me, and because Abu Dhabi can't really convert anyone. And I was like really having an internal struggle. I really did not really like talking about it, or really like, because I felt like kind of like, oh, no one, like I felt like wasn't wanted, which was like hard, obviously. And then Max was like, oh, I'm Orthodox, you should come with me. And I kind of like, I vaguely knew about Orthodoxy. I didn't really understand the difference. Like actually the people who really brought me to the Catholic Church initially, they were Orthodox. Like it was like the guys on my team were Orthodox because they were Eastern European, and like they were like, yeah, you should come. And they never really explained to me that it was different too. And they didn't never really explain that they were actually something different. And I don't know. So like that was kind of funny. And so, but I went to church with Max, and I got there. I was like, wow, this is really, like, I felt like something was really important in the Catholic Church. And then I went to an Orthodox church, and I was like, I could never go back anywhere else. This is it.
Wow.
And
look how God
continued
lined that up.
Yeah.
And
I was praying.
Right? Like God's hand, you can just see in it.
Wow. Yeah. And I was praying about it, and I went back to Abu Dhabi like January 2022, and I was still kind of confused. I was like, wow, I feel like this is really important, like, you know, that kind of stuff. I've been going to like the Orthodox Church with Max quite a lot, and I was talking to another one of now my god brother, one of my very good friends, Georgi, and he was like, oh, like, I'm really sorry, this is so hard. And then like one day he shows up, he's like, hey, I'm going back to Georgia for a bit to go get some dentist stuff done, and because I want to go home and see my girlfriend. Do you want to come? And I was like, yeah, sure, I'd come. He's like, I might, like, you know, my mom would really be happy if you wanted her to be your godmother. And I was like, well, that's not like, I was like, it had been at like the level of like, wow, like every point I had turned, I felt like, you know, something had happened. And I was like, oh, this isn't gonna happen, but like that would be cool, right. Sure. And I show up, and then yeah, and I met my godmother, and and I got baptized, and it was awesome. And it really felt like it was a long journey, and it was a hard journey, but it really felt like that was what God wanted. And I have a really beautiful family in Georgia now, and like I was really happy to bring Max and introduce them to Max this summer. And he had a great time in Georgia, which was awesome. And I think it was really beautiful, because I think being in Georgia is like, if the Orthodox Church here is beautiful and it's wonderful, and going back to Georgia, you really see like this has been like, even though like unfortunately there was a long period during the Soviet Union where people couldn't really worship, you still are there, and you're like, we have been like our people have been worshiping there for like 2,000 years, like almost 2,000 years.
It's amazing.
And
yeah.
It's amazing, and it's really powerful. And I think it gave me a really strong like emotional connection to like the Orthodox Church, and really like I really feel like that's like, it gave me like the straight connection to like the community that I found in the church. So that's cool.
Oh, that's neat. That's really wonderful. And now the two of you are in a parish in the East Village, but it's not Georgian, right? Like tell me about your parish a little bit.
Yeah, so we go to a Rusin Carpatho-Rusin church. So the Carpatho-Rusins are a people who actually are like from like Poland, Ukraine, Slovakia, like and Czechia,
right?
The mountain people, yeah.
Carpathian mountains, yeah.
Yeah, and I've actually recently realized that my family, like, I'm Czech as well, so, like, I'm kind of, like, I'm trying to figure out if maybe my family's Rusin. That would be cool. I have no idea. It's a long time ago, because, like, you know,
it's hard to trace, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's really hard to trace, but I can say it in my heart, I can say it. But, yeah, so this parish has been absolutely wonderful. We are really connected to the priest there, Father William, and his wife Pani Elena, and they have three very beautiful children, Helen, David. I don't know if I should say their names online, but they're awesome.
Cuties.
They're very sweet kids, and we've really connected there. Father William's awesome, and then there's a really great community there. There's some young people connected to the OCF. I mean, that's how Max met Vasi, and then Vasi and I met your daughter. And yeah, and she's like immediate best friend. Awesome. Yeah.
Well, you guys have a neat OCF there too, right? Because you have a lot of Coptic Orthodox, you have a lot of, and I feel like very often the kids, unlike you, who grow up in the church, they only know like Greeks or Serbs or Russians or whatever. And they go to OCF and they're like, whoa, there are a whole bunch of Orthodox people. And it's just such a beautiful pan-Orthodox thing. And I don't know, I love that. And that you guys have developed such tight friendships from that group is so beautiful.
It's really cool too, because there are a lot of Copts as well in our OCF. And so we've made some good friends through that as well, and like experienced more of the Coptic church as well.
It's neat. It's really neat for all of us to be able to make those connections. I love that. Yeah. I love that. And so now you are working in cybersecurity, and you are decorating the church. You're doing flower arranging. Yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. And Max,
it's awesome.
Max, are you singing in the choir now?
Yes. So I'm a classically trained singer. I sang opera a little bit, and I
forgot to mention that.
I was well. He
does a lot of things.
I do many. I do painfully many. Well, we didn't get into the cult stories either, now did we? Okay, I didn't get to tell the Scientology story, now did I?
He wasn't.
Yes.
He wasn't in a cult, by the way.
I wasn't in a cult. I just hung out with them. It was an interesting time. But you know what? We're not going to get into these things. Okay, maybe we'll do a follow up. But let me tell you, yes, there was a time that I acted semi-professionally, and there was a time that I sang a little bit of opera, and now I sing tenor or sometimes baritone, depending on needs as they are required in our church. And I find it really lovely, actually. The interesting thing about being in a Carpatho-Rusin parish is that it was very briefly, for a strange reason, a Uniate church that then rejoined the Orthodox Church as a diocese.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's sort of interesting because in my
is.
past I was in a Greek parish, and of course I visited, Russian, Serbian, Antiochian parishes, and they're all lovely.
Yeah.
But what I find is the Carpatho-Russian music and chants are a bit unusual, as they take a lot more Western influence. I'm yet to visit, unfortunately, a Western Rite Orthodox church. I know that they do exist. And I would really like to, because it's so interesting to see that intersection of East and West and how the music changes and the real diversity that you see within that faith tradition. I think is something that makes Orthodoxy just a really beautiful faith.
I think you're absolutely right. I think too often we're sort of down on the idea that, well, we're all ethnic, we're all different. It's like, actually, it's beautiful because there's so much richness. And we're just lucky to be in a country where we get to see all of it. Whereas normally you have to be like, you can see one in one country, right? Malia, what were you going to say?
I think that's one of the coolest parts of living in New York. And so another kind of a part of OCF is like we do Orthodoxy on Tap, which is like a young person social in New York. And we've met some more of our very good friends there. And one of our friends loves to call it that he's pan-Orthodox because he's an American convert. And we've been together with him as well. We've been able to visit so many very beautiful parishes in New York, and that's absolutely wonderful. Like we've been together to like a Greek parish, a Serbian parish, multiple Greek parishes, a Serbian parish, an Antiochian parish, and like a Russian parish and an OCA parish.
It is one of the strengths of New York, right? Because it's such a big city with so many different communities. I love that.
And I think that's one of the most wonderful parts of living in New York, because like it actually is a really surprising reminder of how despite all the disjointedness and the chaos in New York, the church is actually very strong in this city. And I think that's really like a wonderful reminder. And also St. Nicholas really has looked out for New York in such wonderful ways. And he's looking after us too. So like, that's pretty cool. And so you can go,
beautiful.
I remember going to the new St. Nicholas shrine in the where the World Trade Center is.
It's so cool.
And it's beautiful. Yes. And I introduced myself, and like a man came up, and it was right after, like I think the deacon who works there came up to me, and he's like, "Oh, like, are you visiting? Are you not?" Like, kind of like all that kind of like introductory things. And I was like, "Oh, I'm visiting for St. Nicholas of Myra on like East 10th Street." He's like, "Wow, well, wonderful," and I'm so glad to have another like he's like another like I don't know exactly what he said, but he's like another like child of St. Nicholas or something like that. Like
I
like
love that. I love
you're
that.
always welcome here.
St. Nicholas. That's what we'll do next time I'm in New York. We'll sit down and we'll talk about St. Nicholas because he is just one of my favorites. He's so dear to me. And you guys, this has been so nice. Thank you. It is so good to get a chance to talk to you and to introduce you to everybody else, because I enjoy the two of you so much. So I love being able to introduce you. So thank you for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you. An hour was very short.
It flies by, doesn't it? And thank you to our audience. Thank you for joining us, and come back next Sunday night to meet another everyday Orthodox Christian. Have a great evening. Good night.
Thank you.